On November 9th, 1963, in the quiet mining town of Omuta, Japan, a regular day would soon turn to devastation. Deep in the tunnels of the Mitsui Miike coal mine, hundreds of lives were caught in the grip of disaster. This is a story of one of Japan's darkest industrial tragedy, a day that forever marked the lives of families, survivors, and an entire community. For generations, the Mitsui Miike coal mine was the heartbeat of Omuta, a source of pride and purpose for its people. It was the largest coal mine in Japan, and the workers who descended each day were the backbone of a nation's industrial growth. But life in the mine came at a price. These men worked in darkness, surrounded by coal dust and looming risk, knowing that a single mistake could end a life. Yet for most, there was no other choice. The mine was their livelihood, and for some, their legacy. As Japan's demand for energy surged, so did the pressure on these men and their families. Yet beneath the surface, dangers were brewing. Dangers that would remain unseen until it was far too late. On November 9th, miners began their workday as they always had. They kissed their loved ones goodbye that morning, not knowing that these might be their final moments together. At exactly 3:12 p.m. deep underground, a sudden coal dust explosion tore through the tunnels. A flash of fire surged, collapsing walls and sealing every path to safety. In an instant, everything changed. The explosion was catastrophic, but the true killer was yet to come. As coal dust settled, an invisible, odorless enemy kept through the mine. Carbon monoxide. Silent and deadly. This gas began to fill every pocket of air, leaving the miners with nowhere to escape. Some of the men managed to reach the lift that could have saved them, but in an order that now echoes in tragedy, their supervisors told them to stay put. Believing that help was on its way, they waited. But as they breathed in the toxic gas, they quietly slipped into unconsciousness. For the majority of the workers, there was no warning. With communication lines destroyed in the blast, most miners had no way of knowing what had happened. Sealed off from the world above, they were trapped with an unseen poison slowly taking their lives. Outside, the news of the explosion reached the surface, but initial rescue efforts were delayed. The mining company, fearing the dangers within the collapsed tunnels, hesitated. No immediate attempts were made to rescue the trapped workers, and 3 hours passed as the deadly gas continued its slow, silent spread. For the families waiting above ground, those hours stretched on with unbearable silence. Their fathers, husbands, brothers, all trapped below without word, without hope. With every passing minute brought a deeper realization that their loved ones might never return. In total, the explosion and poisoning took the lives of 458 men. Over 550 others managed to survive, but carried lifelong scars. Many suffered permanent health issues, respiratory damage, memory loss, tremors, visible reminders of a day that would never leave them. For those who lost loved ones, the grief was compounded by unanswered questions. These men were the backbone of their families, and without them, their children, wives, and parents face uncertain futures. The community was devastated and soon began to demand accountability. Survivors and family members joined together in grief and outrage. They asked, how could this have happened? The community needed answers, but the company's response was painfully slow. They wanted justice and vowed to fight until the lives lost were honored with the truth. For those who survived the carbon monoxide poisoning, life was never the same. Carbon monoxide, a silent poison, leaves deep, invisible scars. Many miners were left with permanent disabilities, unable to work, relying on their families for care. Their minds and bodies bore the weight of that day in ways only they could understand. The trauma of that day ran even deeper. Nightmares, panic, and fear plagued survivors who had left the air grow heavier, knowing they were being left to die. This disaster exposed not only the dangers of the work, but also the burden of an industry that had failed to protect its own. The investigations that followed revealed a painful truth. This was no unavoidable accident. This disaster was the result of a dangerous myth. Mitsui Mining Co. believed, mistakenly, that coal dust explosions couldn't happen without methane gas. This single myth blinded them to critical safety risks. Basic safety measures like ventilation, dust control, and regular inspections had been neglected. Workers had little training on how to respond to explosions or gas leaks. This was a preventable tragedy, and the cost of that negligence was paid with lives. The Miike Mine disaster left a deep scar, not just on the town of Omuta, but across Japan. It became a wake-up call for mining safety, and in the years that followed, the government introduced new regulations aimed at preventing another tragedy. Stricter ventilation, dust control, and worker training became mandatory. Labor unions and safety advocates pushed for safer conditions, fueled by the memory of those who had died. The disaster became a rallying point for workers' rights, and communities across Japan embraced a new standard for safety in dangerous industries. Today, a quiet memorial stands at the Miike mine site, a place of remembrance for those who never returned. Families, friends, and descendants came to honor the 458 lives lost that day, lives taken too soon. This memorial is more than a site. It's a promise that these men will never be forgotten. The Miike Mine disaster stands as a powerful reminder of the cost of neglect and the importance of ensuring that every worker returns home safely.